Hello and a very warm welcome to World's Panorama, the show that gives you a 360-degree view of the events that shape your world. I'm Sana Khan. Before we move ahead, here's a look at this week's top stories. Defiant Iran claims advances in nuclear technology, agrees for IAEA inspection of facilities. Pakistan's Prime Minister Yusuf Raza Gilani indicted by the Supreme Court. Gilani says his party will protect the Constitution. At least 350 inmates killed in a massive fire in Honduras prison. President orders for a detailed investigation. And North Korea celebrates Kim Jong-il's birth anniversary. Leader remembered in style with parade and class. Those were the top stories this week. Our focus are the fast-moving developments in Iran. Iran has signaled it is willing to resume nuclear talks just a day after President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad toured a nuclear facility using the country's first domestically produced fuel rods. How is the West looking at it? And what about the geopolitical scenario now? To discuss this and more, I'm pleased to have with me in the studio Mr. Pramod Kumar Singh. He's a senior journalist. But before we go to him, take a look at this special report.
Iran flexes its nuclear muscles despite sanctions. As it trumpets advances in nuclear technology on Wednesday, citing new uranium enrichment centrifuge and domestically made reactor fuel in a move abetting a drift towards confrontation with the West over its disputed atomic ambitions.
I'm announcing that within the regulations of the agency, we are ready to share our know-how with IAEA member states. The nation of Iran has found its bright path, one that our martyrs opened for us. You saw the mother of the martyr say one thing: continue in the path of the martyr. Our path will continue.
The announcement underlines Iranian determination to pursue a nuclear program its Islamic clerical rulers see as a pillar of power, protection and prestige despite Western sanctions that are inflicting increasing damage on Iran's oil-based economy. The Iran-Israel conflict is also looking to increasingly snowball into a huge economic and defense controversy. On Wednesday, Iran further struck back at the West by indicating it was on the verge of imposing a midwinter fuel squeeze to Europe in retaliation for a looming boycott of Iranian oil. But these reports were later denied. Meanwhile, Iran is facing new international complications. Accusations of bringing an apparent covert conflict with Israel to points stretching from Thailand in India to the former Soviet Republic of Georgia.
We raised the issue of terror led by groups like the Hezbollah and especially the Iranians. Recently in Bangkok, in Delhi and in Tbilisi. We see it in a very sincere way. It's a breaking of rules of diplomacy and the behavior of nations.
We are not accepting, we are denying this, and I don't know how they can be assumed within a short than 1 hour to say who has done this. If it is happening in India. If India's security said something like that, we have to verify. This is the real fact. It's not considerable. It is not under consideration, and really it is a fault that always they are telling such a thing, and they will go behind that.
Amid all the tensions, Beijing has come out in open support of Tehran.
The Iranian side has expressed its willingness to resume the dialogue with related parties, enhance cooperation with the IAEA, start a new round of fruitful dialogue soon, and is ready to have serious discussions with the 6 nations on Iran's nuclear issue.
Analysts say the fuel rod development itself will not put Iran any closer to producing nuclear weapons, but could be a way of telling Tehran's adversaries that time is running out if they want to find a negotiated solution to the dispute.
Mr. Singh is here with me in the studio. Mr. Singh, one crucial question, let me ask you, is not that Iran has showcased its nuclear prowess, but the timing of it. The same time when these blasts happened and the blame was on Iran, and also the, the sanctions that have been imposed by the West and its allies.
See, Iran is not worried about the sanction imposed by US and its allies.
Yeah.
because had it been worried, it wouldn't have gone ahead with its program. When President Mahmoud inserted that nuclear rod in its reactor, he hammered across a terse message to the West that we are here to stay. We are not going to be cowed down by US and its allies. Because President made it very clear that their program was of civilian nature, Iran wants to solidify its energy needs in the coming future.
Right.
And Iran's chief negotiator, Mr. Jalili, wrote a letter to EU bloc that Iran was willing to come to the negotiating table.
Right.
And by doing it, they played a master stroke. They blunted the war cry of the US and its allies. And now US can't say that Iran is very hard-nosed and it's not willing to come to the talks.
Right. So that was a tactical move on the part of Iran then to say that, all right, we are willing to come to the talking table. But then, is it time now, do you think, that US and its allies are going to perhaps look at stricter sanctions on Iran?
That they are doing already. In fact, US has been pushing India very hard to toe its line, but our government has refused to toe their line, and India has, in fact, entered into a major trade agreement with Iran, wherein we are supposed to pay 45% of the total trade that we do in rupees. It's akin to rupee-ruble trade that we had with Russia. And China and Russia are not willing to toe the US line. That is the major hiccup for them. And US and its allies and Israel, they are thirsting to strike Iran. If you see the reports emanating from the West media, they said the attack could take place by June.
Okay.
Russian media reported it very widely that the attack on Iran reactors could take by June, but I don't think that will take place. Better sense will prevail after Iran has offered the talks.
Talks, right. Also, it's interesting you mentioned these reports because there are also reports now coming in talking of a Cold War, nuclear Cold War kind of a situation, which is expected in the very near future now. Do you think something like this is going to be happening, and the US should be wary of Iran's thinking now and its steps ahead?
US has been doing it in phases. After US and its allies, they bombed Iraq and attacked Iraq. They kept on harping that there were weapons of mass destruction, and none of them were found. All those UN inspectors who inspected Iraqi facilities, they were all the spies of MI5 and CIA, and they got nothing. They have been trying to bully Iran. But the problem with Iraq was that it was a dictatorship, while in Iran there's a democracy.
Right.
If Iranians feel that President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is going against their country's interests, they can very well vote him out.
Absolutely.
This is where US loses its stuff.
Right. And also, earlier when we were chatting up, you were talking about the greater fears that the US has now with, Syria, Iran, a couple of other nations coming together. That could be,
the major worry for the US administration and the EU bloc is that Shia axis is building up. That is, President Assad has been pushed to the wall in Syria. Iraq, Iran and Syria are coming together. They have entered, there are reports that all three governments have entered into a closer agreement and pact. If that takes place, the three major oil-producing countries, if they come together, that will be having an adverse effect to US interest. And you can't trust US also. During the Iran-Iraq war, when this war was at its height, Reagan administration provided arms to Iran. And the money that was generated, they sent it to Nicaragua, to the Contra rebels, to fight Sandinista regime, because US did not want Sandinista regime to be there. So they have been doing it since ages, and there is nothing new into it.
Right. So let's talk a bit more about Iran and what it has done, by showcasing, by daring the US, and its allies at this point. What's the impact that Iran has created? Of course, the repercussions have been many, but what's the larger picture?
See, what has emerged by now that the Iranian government, led by President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, they have refused to bow down to US and the pressure exerted by US and its allies. Iran knows, and the world knows, that if Iran goes and closes the Persian Gulf, fuel supply to the entire world will be shut. And that will be having a major impact all over the world. And this is what US is worried.
Right.
Because when President Nasser, he nationalized Suez Canal, there was lots of hue and cry, but he stuck to his gun, and he was well within his rights. Any country has the right to safeguard its interest. Its national interest, and its assets.
Right.
And the pride of its people. And that is what President Mahmoud is doing. I don't think that he will yield an inch to US. Come what may.
All right. So that's the final word. It'll be very interesting to see what happens in the days to come as far as Iran, the US and its allies are concerned, also Israel. With that, I'll have to wrap up this discussion. Mr. Singh, thanks so much for joining me here in the studio and discussing this. Time for a very short break. Up ahead, Eurozone calls for tighter oversight over Greece on its bailout plan. Catch the latest in a report after a short break. Thanks for staying with us here on World Panorama. Pakistan's Prime Minister Yusuf Raza Gilani, indicted by the Supreme Court this week, was once seen as a shrewd operator with the best chance of bringing stability to Pakistan. But the longest-serving civilian Prime Minister in Pakistan's turbulent history may be at the end of the line because of his defiance of the Supreme Court, which has become increasingly assertive over the last few years. Here's more on what happened this week.
Pakistan's beleaguered Prime Minister Yusuf Raza Gilani has been charged with contempt of court. The Prime Minister could be jailed if found guilty.
वज़ीर-ए-आज़म हैं और इंशाल्लाह रहेंगे, लेकिन आज यकीनन एक बड़ा अफसरदा दिल के साथ हम खड़े हैं, बड़ी तकलीफदेह सूरत हाल में खड़े हैं. For the first time, Prime Minister of Pakistan has been charged. It's a sad day in the history of Pakistan.
The crisis facing the ruling party of Pakistan deepened after Yusuf Raza Gilani was indicted for failing to reopen corruption cases against President Zardari.
The Prime Minister has taken a very clear position that they will not write the letter that the Supreme Court is asking him to write. So that position is very clear. And to that extent, there is continuing contempt in the face of the Supreme Court.
The case against Gilani is being widely seen as a power struggle between Pakistan's major institutions, the military, judiciary and the government, ahead of parliamentary elections scheduled for early next year.
Well, obviously, if he is convicted, there will be an issue regarding his eligibility as member of the National Assembly and hence his ability to stay on as Prime Minister. But that may not happen immediately. His disqualification may require the Speaker of the National Assembly to send a reference to the Election Commission and for the Election Commission to then decide. And that could take anywhere from up to 4 to 6 months. So that's a fairly long, drawn-out process, if indeed that process is followed.
Meanwhile, Gilani said it was his party, the PPP, that was stopping him from stepping down. The civilian-judicial confrontation stems from thousands of old corruption cases thrown out in 2007 by an amnesty law passed under former military president Pervez Musharraf.
Eurozone finance ministers have demanded much greater oversight of Greece's economy in return for a €130 billion bailout package. In a 3-hour conference call on Wednesday, the ministers scrutinized Greece's planned budget cuts. A decision on the bailout is expected to be finalized this week.
Debt-stricken Greece has to now deal with the possibility of direct fiscal control from Brussels. As patience runs thin in Europe with delays in the Greek reform plan, its creditor countries struggle to bridge divisions over a rescue of Greece, seeking more control over how future aid is spent as the clock ticked toward a possible default next month. Both the euro as well as key stocks took a nosedive as well. The NATO Secretary General has acknowledged that Greece is still an important member of NATO in providing peace and security and should continue its contribution despite budget cuts in defense spending.
The international economic crisis has hit Greece extremely hard, and the certainties of the past, jobs, salaries, pensions, now seem much less certain. Against that background, I understand that the Greek government needs to focus on getting finances back in order.
Greece is cutting its defense budget by 300 million euros in order to reduce costs and meet the terms of a second rescue loan agreement by the European Union and the International Monetary Fund. Greece is also expected to cut yet another 100 million euros from their defense budget as the government struggles to close a massive budget deficit. Eurozone leaders have been negotiating the Greece bailout package for weeks now without any sort of consensus in sight. Greece needs a 130 billion euro rescue package in fresh loans and a write-down on privately held government bonds to avoid defaulting on debt owed on March the 20th.
With Syrian cities under fire, President Bashar al-Assad set a date later this month for a referendum on a new constitution. A gesture apparently designed to offer some kind of government-controlled change after almost a year of the most sustained crackdown in the so-called Arab Spring. Here's a report.
Syrian President Bashar Assad ordered a referendum for later this month on a new constitution that would allow political parties other than his ruling party the centerpiece of reforms he has promised to ease the crisis.
نبدأ من الخبر الذي ترونه على الشاشة.
President Azad issued a decree to hold a referendum on the 26th of this month for a draft constitution for the Syrian Arab Republic.
The new draft constitution is part of a set of reforms introduced in response to the insurgency. If passed, it would restrict the president to serving a maximum of 2 terms of 7 years and introduced a pluralistic party system. But with cities such as Homs in open revolt, critics say holding an inclusive referendum will be impossible. This explosion hit a major oil pipeline feeding a refinery in the Syrian city of Homs on Wednesday, near a large Sunni Muslim district under bombardment by government forces. A large plume of smoke was still rising from the pipeline, which runs near farmland at the edge of Baba Amr district some 2 hours after the blast. Over elsewhere in Syria, violence continues. At least 14 people were killed Tuesday in a gunfire between security troops and the armed forces in Aleppo.
Singer, actress, model Whitney Houston passes away in Los Angeles. We at World Panorama get you reactions from across the world after this very short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Let's now take a look at some of the other developments across the globe in our next report.
In one of the worst prison fires ever in Latin America, at least 357 people died in the blaze that began late on Tuesday night at the prison in Comayagua, about 75 kilometers north of the capital, Tegucigalpa. Worried and angry relatives surrounded the prison on Wednesday morning, at one point throwing rocks at police and trying to force their way inside the prison. Police responded by firing shots into the air and shooting tear gas at protesters. The Honduran president has ordered a full investigation and vowed to raise prison standards. A forensic team had been called in to conduct dental and DNA tests to try to identify those killed. Many of the bodies were charred beyond recognition. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea held a series of events to commemorate the 70th birth anniversary of the late leader Kim Jong-il on Wednesday. Figure skaters from the DPRK, Russia, China, Bulgaria, France and Finland performed for the festival. Kim Yong-nam, president of the Presidium of the Supreme People's Assembly, along with other senior officials and foreign delegation attended the festival. Kim Jong-il ruled with an iron fist for 17 years, but since his death 2 months ago, expressions of mourning and adoration have been common in Pyongyang. Bahraini security forces fanned out across the island nation in unprecedented numbers on Tuesday as Shiites marked the one-year anniversary of their uprising against the country's Sunni rulers. Authorities sent troop reinforcements and armored vehicles to the predominantly Shiite village around Manama, the capital, to prevent people from gathering and answering the call of the main opposition movement, Al-Waqaf. Facing a tough bid for re-election in November at a time when America's unemployment rate remained stubbornly high, US President Barack Obama used his meeting with Xi at the White House to press charges against what Washington sees as unfair trade practices of China. The Chinese vice president warned Washington against protectionist measures in his behind-the-scenes talks with Obama. Trade friction between China and America should be resolved through dialogue, not protectionism, on the principle of consultation on an equal basis and mutual benefit, the Chinese vice president told Obama.
With that, it's time to gear up for some sports action in our next segment.
Zlatan Ibrahimovic inspired AC Milan to a 4-0 demolition of Arsenal in the Champions League on Wednesday, although the sorry performance of the visitors had as much to do with the scoreline as the volatile Swedes' brilliance. Both teams had to cope with the difficult pitch, the two flanks resembling a ploughed field, but Milan were far more comfortable playing on the surface. Ibrahimovic set up 2 goals for Robinho and one and converted a penalty for the fourth to leave Milan almost certain of ending their dismal recent record against English opposition. Second leg will be played in London on Tuesday on the 6th of March. Manchester City's rebel striker Carlos Tevez arrived back in the UK on February the 14th, with his future at the Premier League club still uncertain. The 28-year-old left his native Argentina on Monday, taking manager Roberto Mancini's olive branch with one hand and hurling an accusation that he was treated like a dog with the other. Tevez is heading back to the club that he hasn't played for since September, after defying Mancini's instruction to warm up during the Champions League defeat at Bayern Munich. Cricketer Yuvraj Singh on Thursday revealed that the malignant lung tumour for which he is undergoing chemotherapy in the United States is almost out of his system after the first cycle of treatment. The treatment will go on till the last week of March before the process of rehabilitation starts in April. Yuvraj had earlier got a message from US cycling legend Lance Armstrong, whose own inspirational triumph over cancer is well documented, wishing him a speedy recovery.
That's all we have for you in this edition of World Panorama. I'll be back next week, same time, with the latest world news and events. We close this edition with a special tribute to Grammy-winning singer and actress Whitney Houston, who ruled as pop music's queen until her majestic voice and image was ravaged by drug use. Thanks for watching.
Stay. I would only be in your way. Oh. So I go, but I know I'll think of you every step of the way.
She's one of my idol then, so she's actually part of my life, and she has been my inspiration also in singing.
I'm just so upset by the fact that I grew up with these people.
I think we all know why she's amazing. She was a great artist.
Incredibly sad news. It's certainly something we've all been talking about for the last few days, and it just breaks my heart.
When I was
started singing, and that kind of one of the songs that I was always desperate to sing was "I Haven't Always Loved You."
Memories, that is all I am taking with me. So goodbye.